Здравствуйте, я не говорю немножко по-русски, но мне сказали, что я могу говорить тоже по-английски. Хорошо. Насчет кризиса, финансового кризиса лучше говорить по-английски. Financial crisis. Well, I'm not going to speak about Poland, but if you are interested about transformation in our part of the world, please go ahead. This will be the first remark. The second is that I know from experience that the most interesting part of every meeting is the discussion. So I am waiting for your remarks and questions. Correspondingly, I try to reduce my introduction to the maximum, even though the topic is huge. And these are two preliminary remarks. I said the topic is huge, and there are lots of misunderstandings about this topic. The first misunderstanding is that many people think that crises occur only in capitalism, but that's absolutely false. If you look at various institutional systems, then you see that the worst crises occur in those when there are the most extreme concentration of political power. And the most extreme concentration of political power was present in socialism, because there were no limits to political power. You know that there was no division of powers within the state, and besides, there was the monopoly of state ownership, which meant that there was a fusion of political and economic power, and whenever there's a heavy concentration of power, there's a risk of very bad policies. And they were true. Stalinism. There was an example of not only economic, but humanitarian catastrophe. Mao Zedong. In China, the same. The Cultural Revolution has brought about millions and millions of dead people. Or the Great Leap Forward. Pol Pot in Cambodia. Millions and millions of murdered people. Why? Because there was extremely heavy concentration of political power. And under this situation, whenever pathological individuals get those power, then there's a catastrophe. This is why limits on political power are an insurance for societies. One should not confuse the freedom of individual with the freedom of the state. If the state is absolutely free, individuals are slaves of the state. So in regimes when there is extreme concentration of political power, one can point out to grave crises or catastrophes. I mentioned some of them, but there are some milder versions. For example, in Poland, we have in the 70s new policies which consisted in incurring foreign debt. These were bonanza years, which led then to a crisis because it turned out that these foreign credits were misused or badly used under socialism. The same happened in Romania, the same happened to some extent in Hungary. So the first sort of regime, socialism, produces from time to time very grave crises. Not only stagnation, but also crises and shocks. Second, there are types, many countries, which have sort of quasi-socialism, which means that political power is also very big. They allow small margins of private business, but what is dominating is the state business, which is always subject to political power. The state ownership means that ultimate power is in the hands of the politicians and bureaucrats. Many so-called third world countries have these sort of systems. All oil-producing countries, I know. Iran, it's a quasi-socialist regime. The difference is that first secretaries are called ayatollahs, but the substance is not different. And no surprise that you have crisis in these systems because there is too heavy concentration of political power. Third type of regime is called chronic capitalism. What does it consist of? You have political authority which tolerates large private sector. So we don't have a huge state sector or state enterprises, but part of this private sector is politically connected. And they have privileges. What privileges? Well, they pay lower taxes. They are not subject to predatory regulations like the majority of other. Now, the result is that under such regimes, which you should know, there is very little competition because you don't have a level playing field. But there's also another consequence. The financial markets know that these privileged businessmen are finally protected by the state. So this is called moral hazard. And as a result, the financial markets quite rationally offer cheap credit. Credit risk is what in the theory of finance we call credit risk is reduced because of these connections with the state officials. And as a result, from time to time, disconnected businessmen incur too many credits, and then there's a crisis. Credit boom. Like in Suharto, Indonesia under Suharto, this was the case. So let me now come to the fourth type of a system. The first was socialism, then quasi-socialism, then crony capitalism, and finally we come to, say, Western type capitalism. Western type, which means that you have division of power in the state, that you have a large private sector, state sector is quite small, and you don't have these privileged groups, call them oligarchs, which have privileges because they enjoy intimate links with the state powers. So it is like that. And when we discuss financial crisis, we usually focus on this sort of a system. Yes, because you look at the US, Britain, etc., and many people think, well, it is in this type of capitalism that there is a crisis. But I just have shown to you that the worst crisis occur in other systems. Now, there is a, with respect to this Western type of capitalism, there is a myth, or there is a widespread belief that the crises under this system are the product of the free market. But this belief is false. Why? First, because you can easily name two kinds of crises which are certainly not the product of the market. First, fiscal crisis. Fiscal crises occur whenever there is too much spending, usually. Persistent increases in spending, not matched by increases in revenues. You have accumulation of public debt. And finally, crisis. The recent example is Greece. So the Greek crisis is not the product of the free market, but of populist policies. You have, under democracy, you have populist policies whenever too many people believe in Santa Claus, Diet Moroz. In politics. Don't believe in Diet Moroz in politics. That's a very dangerous belief. Because politicians are not Diet Moroz. They always take money from other people and then distribute. So whenever it's the more a politician promises, the more dangerous he is or she is. That's a very elementary indication. So fiscal crises under capitalism, which occur from time to time, are not the product of free markets. The second type of crisis are called crises in the enclaves of socialism. In various capitalistic countries, you have enclaves of socialism. By an enclave of socialism, I mean a part of the society and the economy which is subject to political control. For example, in the US, you may have heard about two huge institutions. One of them is called Fannie Mae, and another one, Freddie Mac. They are formally private, but in fact they were very politicized. And they channel cheap credit to households, and this contributed to crisis in the United States. Or during the recent financial crisis in Germany, what sort of banks suffered the most? Germany has a peculiar structure of the banking sector because it has pretty large part of publicly owned banks, which are called Landesbanken. They are controlled by the lender, the regional political authorities, and they have other banks. And most of the lender banks are in crisis. But only some of the private banks are in crisis, which shows that political control over the banks is very dangerous. And this has been confirmed by previous research of the World Bank. Or in Spain, you have a similar structure. In Spain, there are institutions which are called cajas, CAS. And these institutions are similar to Landesbank in Germany, and it so happened that all of them almost are in crisis. So there are crises in any case of socialism under capitalism. But many people blame capitalists for that, because they disregard the elementary fact that the crisis is connected to the predominance of political power over business or links, even within capitalism whenever this exists. Now, the most tricky issue is the financial crisis, which occurs not only in the end case of socialism, like the one which started in 2007, 2008 in the United States. And here there are the most misunderstandings, I think. Here are the three elementary questions which should be distinguished. First, what are the deep causes, not superficial? When one looks at superficial causes, one confuses symptoms with causes. So we have to look a bit deeper. Second, why financial crises usually cause recessions. So there is a slowdown in economic activity, sometimes negative growth, minus. And third, why recessions or slowdowns which occur differ in length. Why some recessions are very long, why some slowdowns. It's not typical for all, but some. For example, in the 30s in the US, there was a very deep and long slowdown. In France, in Germany, but not in Scandinavia, not in Italy, not in Britain. Nowadays in Japan, as you know, Japan was one of the Asian tigers and was very successful. But then something happened. At the turn of the 80s and the 90s, there was a financial crisis. And since then, Japan is growing very slowly, much, much slower than. So there's a puzzle. Why? And that's a very important puzzle. Because if you grow slowly, then you cannot solve well the problems. Before I tackle these three questions, let me mention one thing. Why this crisis is called global? Is it because it erupted at the same time everywhere? No. It is global because it was started in the countries in a country which is globally important. And now we have only one country which is global economy, which is globally important, which is the United States, which accounts for 25% of global GDP. So whenever it is a problem in this country, everybody other countries suffer to some extent. But this extent to which they suffer depends. For example, in Central and Eastern Europe, the Baltics have a decline in GDP in 2009 more than 10%, 14, 15%. You in Russia had 8% or 9%. Very substantial decline. In Ukraine, more or less a bit more. In Armenia, minus 14. But in Czechia, minus 3. In Slovakia, minus 4. In Poland, plus 1 point something. So huge differentiation. So one cannot say that everybody is equally hit. Something else intervenes. What is this something else? What explains this differentiation of impact of the global financial crisis? There are several factors. First, countries which have suffered very much have suffered because they have previous booms. The credit was growing too fast. So they would have their own crisis even without the global crisis, only later, and not so deep perhaps. So it was the case, the boom was in the Baltics, housing boom, in Russia, in the corporate sector, which is related to construction, in Ukraine. In Western Europe, there was a housing boom in Spain, Ireland, Britain, and all these countries suffered pretty much, more than other countries. The second factor is whether your economy depends on commodities, the prices of which fluctuate widely, like gas and oil. It's very dangerous to be a Kuwait, or to be dependent very much on these resources. And this introduces volatility, which contributed to problems of Russia and Ukraine, for various reasons. In your case, you have gas and oil. You have this mixed blessing of having oil and gas. And Ukraine is dependent on export of metallurgical products, but both categories fluctuate. And finally, smaller countries which more depend on export suffer the more than larger countries. For example, in Poland, our ratio of foreign trade to GDP is 70%, a bit less, but in Hungary it's 140%. So if there's a recession in the West, Hungary suffers much than Poland. So this is the combination of factors, but remember, countries which have suffered the most are not innocent by its standards. They've been pursuing wrong policies, or they were tolerating wrong policies, and they were punished by external forces and their wrong policies. And whenever there is a wrong policy, the punishment comes. But who is punished? The population, not necessarily those who are the authors of wrong policies. But at least people should understand what are the reasons. Okay, let me now return to these three questions very briefly. What are the causes of the financial crisis? The proximate cause is always an excessive growth of credit. It may be a credit for the housing sector, it may be a credit for investment. The credit may come from the domestic financial system, or it may come from abroad, or from both. You know, it's like driving a car. There are speed limits. If you drive too fast, you are more likely to suffer an accident. So there are speed limits to the growth of credit, and usually if you see that credit grows 20, 30, 40% a year for a couple of years, this is inviting an accident, and this happened. That's a superficial reason, but always, to my knowledge. And this may be coupled with a bad distribution of risks. These two things are related because if you extend credit very fast, the quality of analysis of credit is declining. So there's a link. But there may be some additional forces which contribute to the deterioration of credit analysis. What's behind this excessive growth of credit, which is the proximate cause of financial crisis, even under the best capitalism? Here we have there's a huge debate, and I don't think the research has brought about definite answers. But we know something, and one should look at empirical research, not just a theoretical model, because theoretical models assume what they want to explain. That's useless. We should check theoretical models with empirical research. And one should not only limit the attention to the recent crisis, because this is too small sample. One should look at the whole experience which is available. And there are certain works which try to look at the whole experience. And they suggest that behind financial crisis, there are wrong public interventions. So that deep financial crises, again, are not the natural product of the free market. I know that Marx thought so. I hope they are not being touched Marx very much. But Keynes also, Keynesianism is related to a notion that free market capitalism inevitably falls into crisis very deeply. I don't think this is confirmed by research. Of course, it is unavoidable that from time to time there is a financial crisis. But what is at stake is the question, what explains frequency of financial crisis? Because financial crises are not distributed evenly over time and space. In some periods, in some countries, they are more frequent. And what explains this frequency? So there are strong suggestions from empirical research that behind this are failed or wrong or politicized financial interventions like what? In the recent crisis, there is more or less a consensus that one important reason was an easy money policy of Federal Reserve Board, Fed. They lowered interest rates too much. Second, there was a strong political pressure in the US to extend housing credit to poor households. This was called subprime lending. You may have it about. Third, since the 30s, all over the world, there is a proliferation of the very generous deposit insurance. So as a depositor, if you know that you cannot lose, you don't care about, you don't watch the banks. So what is called market discipline is being undermined. Fourth, the states, some Western states have intervened to bail out, to rescue the banks in the past, which leads to what economists call moral hazard, which means the financial markets to believe that whatever, if the bank is large, it's not going to go bust. What is the consequence? It's like implicit insurance, yes? So these institutions get cheap credit from the financial market, so they can grow bigger and bigger, and the problem grows. And by the way, there were also mergers during the recent crisis, because one bank takes over another bank, and it's even larger monsters appear, etc., etc. There is a long list, but I think it can be shown that especially deep crises are due to various combinations of state interventions. And the final third question is why it is so that some crises lead to long slowdowns, like in Japan since 20 years' time, or I mentioned the US, or France, or Germany in the 30s. This is extremely important question, because a slowdown is very painful, especially if you will be growing very fast, like Russia until the crisis. There was a bonanza years, real wages they were growing and 10% a year. What happened next? And what causes these painful episodes of long, long slowdowns? And again, this is an open frontier in research. We don't have ready answers. We know something. First of all, one can dismiss the notion that it's again because of free market. Because most other recessions are short. And recessions which are short occur in about the same type of capitalism. So one cannot explain long recession by features of capitalism. That's a simple logic. You don't need to know a lot of econometrics. So one has to look to other explanations, and people have been looking to other explanations, and behind long recessions or slowdowns, they usually have found various combinations of failed policies again. If you look at the 30s, one important reason was a wave of protectionism, spiral of protectionism. Beggar my neighbor policies. One reason, but this does not explain everything. Second, monetary policy in some countries was too restrictive, so money supply was declining, especially in the US. Third, contrary to what we are probably taught, Franklin Delano Roosevelt policies were not very good for the economy. He was not a savior. Because there was, and this wrong policy started even under his predecessor, President Hoover. They believed then that the problem is because of the lack of aggregate demand, spending. And they came to the conclusions that in order to stimulate demand, they have to push up wages in the private sector. But what happens if we are pushing up wages too much? Profits are declining. And if profits are declining, that investment is declining. And this was accompanied by the hostile policy towards the private business. So the investment climate was deteriorating. And private investment was not growing. And this was sufficient to cause a prolonged slowdown in the US. What about Japan? That's a very interesting story. Why Japan is growing so slowly? Again, we don't know everything, and this is why it's so important to study Japan, even if you are not in Japan. Some people have, there was not enough fiscal stimulation in Japan. It's pretty difficult to believe because they have now public debt to GDP more than 200%, gross debt. Net debt is less. The serious empirical work which I know would suggest that one of the reasons was politicized credit allocation, a desire or attempt to direct credit to huge enterprises which would otherwise go bust. And if you direct credit to such enterprises, there's less credit to other enterprises. So there's a misallocation of credit. So less efficient parts of the economy are maintained at the cost of the growth of more efficient parts of the economy, which unavoidably slows down the growth. There are some other reasons we are mentioning in the literature, like overregulation of the service sector. In fact, you have two Japans. The one we know from the stories, very competitive, export industries, Toyota, consumer electronics, but they account only for a small part of Japanese economy. The majority consists of services, as in every advanced economy, and services are very much regulated, so there's little competition, and the average productivity in services in Japan is much, much lower than in the US. So if 60 or 70% of your working population works in constrained, regulated sector, you cannot be very fast growing. So it seems that the Japanese problem requires, first of all, structural reforms, which would eliminate various restrictions to competition in non-exporting sector. Okay, summing back, as you can see, we have a lot of fascinating problems to research, and all of them are of practical relevance. The world after the crisis will be different, but this does not mean that the previous findings are invalid. No. What are the previous findings? Capitalism is better than socialism. Reduce the scope of political power in society. Capitalism, however, works good if there is a competition. Competition requires free entry and equal treatment of entrepreneurs. If you have a privileged group of entrepreneurs, there is not much competition. You can't grow very fast over the longer run. Natural resources is a mixed blessing. So in an economy which is initially dominated by large natural resources, you have huge problems. One is, Dutch disease, meaning that wages are working too high in non-oil exporting sectors. And second is that it is very easy to have bad policies because you can finance bad policies. But where is the change? The change is that the boom years for oil exporting countries and gas exporting are over, I think. So there will be no repetition of the years until the crisis from the year 2000. Because I don't expect that oil prices would grow as fast as before. And the same goes for even more for gas prices because there's an emerging competition. So countries like Russia, which depend very much on these sectors, in order to grow, they would need much more reforms. Easy times are over. And there's a good news for everybody who understands that reforms require incentives. Thank you very much.
Ну что, коллеги, ваши вопросы. Пожалуйста.
I'm a member of economical class of our institute, and I wanted to ask you a question. Do you think is it possible to change Russian economy or to overcome the difficulties which we have now in this political system which we have now in Russia? Or at first we have to change something in our politics and then to improve our economy?
That's a fundamental question, but this question should be divided into two. At first, what would be the technical economic solutions in countries like Russia? Of course, I am an outsider, so I can't go into specifics. In order to create more long-lasting forces for growth. And second question is, so you have to identify the necessary reforms. And it's very important. That's not a trivial question. It's very important to know what are the key reforms. Because only then you can come to the second question, how to make it possible that these reforms will be launched and sustained. Now, proposals for reforms are like the proposals for therapy in medicine. They have to be based on right diagnosis. And there's a lot of diagnoses. There are many very good Russian economists. You don't need to import advice because you have lots of them here. And I've read some, so I am not going to be original because there is no need to be original. So first of all, and I will mention certain things, perhaps not in the order of importance. Your inflation is too high and persistent. So you would need, normal inflation is not over 10%. It's, say, a couple of percentage points. It's possible to. In Poland, when I started in 1989, we had 50% a month inflation. There was even high inflation in your case. And when I started to be the governor of the central bank, the inflation was more than 10% in 2001, and we have gradually lowered this to 2%. So 2-3%. That's fundamental. That's very elementary. So technically, it's not very difficult. It has to be okay. So at technical level, there are solutions. Second, your economy is largely politicized, both formally and informally. Formally, because there are huge state enterprises. And they are supposed to be the modernizers. I don't think there's a much chance for that. If you look at the stories of other countries, very rarely it happens that state-owned enterprises, which are directed from the top, have been national champions. There's a name, national champions, but in practice, those national champions are national losers. They need subsidies. And subsidies and cheap credit means that more efficient enterprises are deprived of them. So there is a wrong allocation of resources. So if a lot of resources is going to inefficient enterprises, less resources will be going to efficient enterprises, and average rate of growth will be slow. And many years ago, my doctorate was dealt with technical change. So I have studied the experience of Western economists who tried to stimulate technical change. It was successful in only one sector, military. In the civilian sector, what was the main achievement under socialism? Well, there is a joke, but there's only a half joke. The Rubik cube. Remember Rubik cube in Hungary? Why? Because there was the basic preconditions for systematic regular inventions were not met. Politicization, first of all, lack of competition, lack of entry. What explains largely that in the US you have this innovation-based economy? Political power is limited. You have a free entry. So it's easy, relatively easy to create enterprises. And then you can attract resources from other enterprises. Because if employment is frozen, if you give privileges to already employed people, then they would not flow to better enterprises. So you need flexible markets. Innovation requires flexible markets. And venture capital, not public funds. Politicians and public officials are guided usually by different criteria than technical and economic success. They like to build pyramids. It is called white elephants. Look at pharaohs. It's not a joke. Prestige consideration. The larger the better, but not more efficient. So reduction, absolute reduction in the politicization in the economy, so that markets can work, can create and can work. Reduction in state ownership. And also creating equal chances for businessmen, so that situation does not exist, that if you are not politically connected, you cannot develop or compete. And some other minor technical details. You tell yourself what is required to introduce these reforms at the deeper level. I am not a specialist in your political economy, but I can only say that without certain mobilization through identification of the key necessary reforms, it should be described in a very easy, it's not difficult. You don't need to know the more advanced microeconomic textbooks. They do not focus on most important problems, by the way, of our economy. Yeah, no, and this can be put very simply. What else? Under more difficult times, which are coming, meaning that the growth is going to be much slower than before, there are going to be increased pressures in the society. And perhaps this is also an opportunity to say, well, we want to be a successful country. We can be a successful country. We have a lot of human capital. There are many educated people. Give us conditions, create conditions for our success. Individual country success is also always based on the success of gifted people in this society and hardworking people, and not just on the prestige of state apparatus.
Спасибо. Я думаю, это очень интересный и необычный для экономиста ответ. Очень часто экономисты пытаются и дают, и с удовольствием дают конкретные советы. Так что, наверное, это действительно очень интересно для экономиста. Вы, пожалуйста.
Zanitsina Marina, the second year of Master Studies. Mr. Bальцерович, thank you for the lecture. Last week, the American president declared a new initiative, tax breaks, which will allow companies to write off all the capital investment through the next year. How can you evaluate the efficiency of such measures in reviving the American economy? Do you think the US can afford such measures, taking into consideration the amount of the public debt of the country? And do you think such measures, similar measures, are possible in Europe and necessary for Europe? Thank you.
Very sophisticated question.
Yes, it is.
Well, I can see. Well, American economic policy is contradictory, especially fiscal. Why? Because on the one hand, spending has been increasing, not only through what was called discretionary spending, this is a small part, but first of all through enaction of the health service reform, which according to empirical research would increase spending. On the other hand, under President Bush, they enacted some tax cuts. which Obama says he is going to abolish these tax cuts. At the same time, he promises new tax cuts. So it's contradictory. And of course, it is politicized. Politics usually impacts, although to a different extent. What's interesting, so it's very difficult to say will it work, but what is more important and overlooked? In America, most people are against large budget deficit. And that's very good, because this controls the politicians. In America, most people do not believe in Santa Claus, Ded Moroz. And this is why you have a social political movement to contain the growth of public debt. I wish we have this in Poland. This is a capital, social capital or political capital. And this protest against increases of the public debt, which are due to increases in spending, are one of the reasons why popularity of President Obama has been declining. So many Americans are more sensible than many economists. Because as you know, many economists are saying it's not enough spending, not enough stimulus. Let us don't disregard the accumulation of the public debt. And with such a society, America has a chance to overcome the problems and to grow faster than Europe, Western Europe. Also because their demography is better. Their labor force is going to grow in contrast to Europe and both Western and Central, and I think in contrast to Russia.
You stated that the crises don't occur because of the free market, but if we look deep inside the causes of this credit crunch, the problem is that a big amount of various hedge funds and other foundations, which were actually doing what banks were doing. They were giving credits, but they weren't officially banks, and because of this, banking regulations weren't applied to these foundations. And that's, I think, not just I, many economic experts think that that's the product of the free market, I don't mean that it should be strictly regulated, but it was free of any interference, and because of this, such a situation was possible. And the other part of my question is that economic policy in the US now is concentrated mostly on the stimulation of aggregate demand. So there is an increase in government spendings, the interest rates have gone down, and that's probably because the unemployment and the aggregate demand are really very connected to each other. And what's your opinion about these measures? And if you don't think they fit the situation in which the US is right now, do you have any, I don't know, maybe some better measures to offer? Thank you.
On the first question, one has to look at the basic facts. The crisis erupted in the most regulated part of the financial sector, which is the banks, some banks. It was hedge funds were rather the victims than the perpetrators. And this should give food for thought. If you regulate the most and you have the crisis. Second, the literature I mentioned, which compares various crises, finds as a deep roots interventions which encourage risk-taking of the private actors. And if there's enough risk, if it is too much risk, there's accumulation of risk. So look at empirical research. Always look at empirical research and compare. So this would be my response. Of course, hedge funds are blamed, but why? Because politicians want to shift the blame. They cannot blame each other. So they try to blame other institutions. So whenever G20 meets, they have to find a culprit. So they find it. But this is not necessarily true. On the US policies, well, there's a lot of discussion in the US, because in the US you have also good economists. And many economists, for example, from Hoover Institution, Stanford University, are very much critical of this fiscal stimulation, increased spending, excesses of it. And they are suggested that, first of all, policies should reduce uncertainty, should improve the business climate. There should be less unpredictability in the regulations. In every country, uncertainty hurts business, investment, and that if there are to be any tax cuts, they has to be permanent and not temporary, because if they are temporary, they do not affect behavior, meaning spending. So I think there is enough advice in the US. The problem is everywhere. It's politics, one has to. But I think there is a chance that sensible policies sooner or later would be initiated in the US, given the public opinion which I mentioned, which is very, very distrustful in the US of big government. What does it mean, big government? Big role of politics in society.
Makarenko Anastasia. I'm a student of this university and a member of МГИМО Economic Club. And first of all, I would like to thank you for your lecture. It was really interesting. And then I'd like to ask you about the relationship between Russia and Poland, because we know that there are now some changes in the political system of Poland, and there is now a new president, Bronisław Komorowski. And I'd like to ask you, what do you think? Will there be any changes in the relationship between Russia and Poland? Thank you.
Well, you know, if you look at history, that you see that the relationship between people of Poland and Russia tended to be much better than the relationship between the states. And that's very important that one should continue this good relationship between people. I have many friends in Russia. At the same time trying to improve the relationship between the states. And I think on the first, the more contacts you have, not just official, informal, the more travels, the better. Because if I remember old times of socialists, there was an official friendship only. But it was impossible to have a true friendship across societies, given the geopolitical situation. And I remember there were initiatives like friendship trains. The trains were going. But it was all arranged. Now it should be as massive as possible, as informal as possible on both sides. There's a lot of interesting things. For example, I am just buying books of Akunin in Russia. And some popular authors are here also popular in Russia, not to mention your classics. And you perhaps can find some interesting things in Poland, in culture. So this is basics. And now I think there is much more scope for these informal contacts, and we should use it more and as much as possible. And at the state level, I think there is also a chance for improvement. Poland plays a pretty important role in the European Union. And I think it would be good if Poland would be an advocate of the sensible positions of the Russian state within this important community.
Спасибо. Я сделаю маленькую рекламу, а потом передам слово для вопроса профессору Энтину. 24 сентября, как вы знаете, будет проходить здесь конвент РАМИ, Российской ассоциации международных исследований. И на этом конвенте мы сделаем презентацию русского издания книги по российско-польским отношениям и вот трудным вопросам этих отношений. Может быть, кто-то знает, что наш ректор сопредседатель этой группы, российско-польской группы по сложным или по трудным вопросам. И вот это стало результатом деятельности группы в течение последних 2 лет. Так что будет презентация книги, и заинтересованные ребята могут ее получить. Такая же книга, но на польском языке, выйдет в Польше, просто там по техническим причинам чуть позднее, там буквально недели через 2-3.
Уважаемые коллеги, вы задали очень интересные вопросы профессору Бальцеровичу, но не позволили ему попрактиковаться в русском языке. Да, поначалу было видно, что владение русским языком блестящее. Вот заканчивая свою лекцию... Нет, мы сможем оценить по достоинству. Заканчивая свою лекцию, вы обратили внимание на то, что капиталистическая система показывает свои преимущества только в условиях свободной конкуренции. Дальше напутствие последовало предложить некоторую систему стимулов для развития экономики и для открытости рынков. Вопрос первый. В результате открытости рынка пострадают те производства и тот частный бизнес, который не конкурентоспособен. В русском языке под стимулами мы подразумеваем обычно не негативные стимулы, ликвидация этих производств и предприятий, а позитивные стимулы. Вот какие позитивные стимулы можно предложить тем предприятиям, тем производству, тем промышленникам, которые пострадают в результате открытости рынка или свободы конкуренции? И второй вопрос. Какие, вы считаете, внешние стимулы необходимы для ускоренного внутреннего развития? Спасибо.
Знаете, конкуренция есть как огонь. Можно сделать такие сравнения. Огонь опасный, потому что можно как-то это попасть. Но без огня жизнь очень плохая. То же самое с конкуренцией. То если кто-нибудь хочет устранить весь риск, связанный с конкуренцией, но тогда есть изоляция. Есть такие страны. Северная Корея. Да, это полная изоляция. И мы видим, как выглядит жизнь без огня, то есть без конкуренции. Make your choice. Во-вторых, не надо хранить предприятия. Надо учесть людей, не предприятий. Особенно громадных предприятий. Скажем, автозаводы. 1 биллион долларов здесь было. Надо смотреть на людей, чтобы они могли проходить до другой работы. Но чтобы это было возможным, надо, чтобы существовали хорошие условия для создания мелких предприятий, некоторые из них будут растут. Без того, ну то что ж, поставит. Так что это вы видите, что охрана предприятий, громадных предприятий и утруднения для создания малых предприятий не связаны. Они связаны. Но это, я не думаю, что можно достичь успеха на этом пути. Есть много-много примеров ошибок. На этом пути тоже при капитализме. Я упомянул Японию. В Корее, Южная Корея – это очень успешная страна. Очень успешная. Но у них тоже были проблемы. Чеболс. Чеболс – это такие конгломераты. Но они хранили эти конгломераты. Политические связи, чеболи. Но это была одна из причин кризиса. Но потом они сделали довольно глубокую реструктуризацию. Что же еще в-третьих? Что это обозначает конкуренция по экономике, чтобы осознать? Во-первых, это выбор товаров. Мы можем выбирать товары или услуги. Это обозначает, что есть более чем одно предприятие. Во-вторых, эти товары должны отличаться друг от друга. Если идентичны, как это было Middle Ages, guilds, как это называется по-русски, в средних веках, но это нет конкуренции. Если, скажем, есть строгое регулирование качества товаров, это они идентичны, но тогда нет конкуренции. И в-третьих, это здесь о стимулах. Те, которые в состоянии благодаря инновациям, эффективности получить больше денег от покупателей, они должны быть возможности растить, платить выше, больше, лучше. Это выигрыш. Но есть проигрыш. Но что случается при конкуренции с теми, которые не в состоянии, они не способны притягивать деньги покупателей? Они должны сокращаться. В крайней мере, банкротировать. Без банкротства нет конкуренции. То есть, если так есть, что те, которые прогревают на рынке, они получают субсидии от государства, это уничтожает конкуренцию. Просто уничтожает, потому что есть выбор, но нет стимулов. Так что я бы сказал, что нет конкуренции без позитивных и негативных стимулов, но это не обозначает, что люди теряют работу навсегда. Это обозначает, что должны быть гибкие рынки труда, чтобы они могли пройти. И в Польше это случилось. У нас самый второй по величине город. Это называется Łódź. 1 000 000 людей. Там была концентрация громадных фабрик, текстильных фабрик. Они экспортировали все. Мы ввели конкуренцию, они почти все упали. Но что случилось? В то же самое время возникали малые частные предприятия. Часть этих людей, не все, в то же самое время они приходили к этим предприятиям и там находили работу. Это, конечно, болезненно, но стагнация более болезненна, чем такая динамика.
У меня на самом деле один вопрос и, так сказать, одна некая реплика. Я был, по-моему, в прошлом или позапрошлом году, ездил по Польше, там родственники. Вот. И что меня очень сильно на самом деле удивило, то, что Польша, не являясь страной, которая продает нефть, которая продает газ, достаточно неплохо живет.
От кого?
Меня, честно говоря, это очень сильно удивило, потому что, я вот не слышал, чтобы Польша производила там, машины Mercedes, да, что там был Siemens, чтобы там, были действительно такие крупные мировые бренды, которые торгуются по всему миру, да. Но тем не менее, так сказать, у них есть свет, есть газ, у них там есть что кушать, на улице достаточно чисто, в общем, вот это, честно говоря, меня несколько удивило, и я, так сказать, спрашивал, почему так идет? Вот так, мы такие поляки. Вот. Поэтому, честно говоря, в этом плане Польша, конечно, показывает какой-то положительный, так сказать, пример. Вот. А второй вопрос у меня, он такой, вот вы сказали, что капитализм лучше социализма. Но, собственно, тогда возникает вопрос, а лучше для кого? Собственно, поясню. Вот если сейчас посмотреть, так сказать, на вот систему вот эту капиталистическую, в частности, на проблему внешнего долга капиталистических стран. Они, так сказать, не часто говорят, но на самом деле, мне кажется, зря. В частности, Соединенные Штаты, у которых внешний долг громадный, триллионы долларов, и в ближайшие 50-100 лет они в принципе не могут его выплатить. То же самое Франция, Англия и так далее. Собственно, большинство западных капиталистических стран обладают таким внешним долгом, который они не в состоянии выплатить. Но если посмотреть, откуда у тех же Соединенных Штатов вот этот внешний долг, это те деньги, которые они занимали в том числе развивающихся стран. У социалистического Китая, у постсоциалистической России, у нефтедобывающих, не социалистических, конечно, арабских стран, но и полностью капиталистических и демократических. Соответственно, получается такая ситуация, что вот эти западные страны, набрав вот это большое количество внешних долгов, собственно, живя за чужой счет, прекрасно живя, и не в состоянии их отдать, ну, так сказать, несколько, так мягко сказать, ну, может быть, не то, что украли, но, по крайней мере, как-то вот нечестно поступили вот по отношению и к этим развивающимся.
Эксплуатируют.
Спасибо. Вот обладая вот своей вот, мощью, за счет этой своей капиталистической мощи, которую они развили, они, так сказать, эксплуатируя весь остальной мир, ну, поставили, собственно, ситуацию достаточно в большой тупик, потому что если начать забирать, ну, потому что нет этих денег, и, собственно, что делать этим развивающимся странам, которых проэксплуатировали, но у них нету достаточно большого, ну, вот этого ресурса для дальнейшего развития. Спасибо. Так что вот последний. Так что, на мой взгляд, вот вы сказали, капитализм лучше социализма. Мне кажется, что и социализм плохо, и капитализм плохо. Спасибо.
No, po faktach, co można сказать? No, to by, что говорили насчет Польши. Но одна из причин это то, что у нас нет газа и нефти. Но в таких масштабах, чтобы они доминировали над экономикой. Это одна из причин. Потому что если есть, я всегда говорю в Польше, мы должны быть счастливы, что мы не являемся Кувейтом. Потому что это такая диспропорция, если большой и удельный вес этих ресурсов. Это мы знаем, это много исследований. Опасный для роста. Во-первых, потому что заработная плата растет в этом секторе, где есть природные ресурсы, и это поражает, так сказать, другие. Так что конкуренцияспособность страдает. Во-вторых, если много денег из природных ресурсов в руках политиков, тогда нет стимулов для реформ. И у вас, когда цены нефти растут, тогда мои друзья говорят мне, о, это хуже. Стимулы для реформ, которые Россия нуждается меньше. Это и нет, за исключением Австралии, где не было такой проблемы, как у вас. Я не знаю никакого успеха, такого громадного, без реформ. Просто из-за природных ресурсов. А второй, ну, во-первых, когда я сказал социализм, я имею в виду такой строй, в котором есть тотальная доминация политики над человеком. И это было Советский Союз, потом другие страны, Китай. И нет хорошего опыта никого. С точки зрения не только страха, но тоже уровня жизни. И есть сравнение. У вас, Россия в 1946 году, это международные данные, уровень валового продукта на одного человека в России, в Советском Союзе был приблизительно $1500, а в Финляндии он был, скажем, $2500. Но что случилось в 1991 году? В Финляндии он был почти $16 000 на человека, а в Советском Союзе 6500. Это то же самое, если мы сравним Польшу и Испанию. То же самое. У нас был похож доход на одного per capita в 50-х годах, а потом в 90-м году, в 90-м это было 42% в руках испанских. Везде нет, если есть тотальная доминация политики над человеком, включая в это монопол государственной собственности, нет возможности успеха на дальнейший срок. Не знаю, никогда не было. И не будет. Это. Но там есть разные виды капитализма. Я не говорю, что все виды лучше. Но есть кроны капитализма. Да, это привилегии малой группы. Это, конечно, он может быть немножко лучше, чем социализм, но не так эффективный. Самый успешный капитализм, он связан с ограниченным государством. Rule of law, правое государство, так, чтобы могли существовать свобода, экономическая свобода, и чтобы не было этих привилегий некоторых бизнесменов. То есть модель, и стабильная макроэкономия и так далее. И это модель, к которой надо стремиться, если это только возможно. То, что вы сказали, ну, это явление последних лет в США. Но прежде, 5 лет тому назад, такого долга не было. Он был малый долг в Соединенных Штатах. Другие страны, скажем, даже Великобритания, на меньший долг. И, во-вторых, этих китайцев никто никогда, это не прессия, это не нажим, они добровольно покупают. Китайцы и арабы покупают, так что чтобы употреблять слово эксплуатация, это, конечно, слишком далеко. Вот это добровольная эксплуатация, это не добровольная. Но, конечно, есть проблема теперь этого долга в Соединенных Штатах, но я, как сказал, это, по моему мнению, эта проблема будет решаться, потому что в Соединенных Штатах большинство населения, оно консервативно по фискальной политике. Оно вынудит политиков. Оно смотрит на руки политикам. И это большая ценность, такое государство. Такое общество,
Ну что, спасибо, потому что у многих из вас начинается лекция. Спасибо профессору Бальцеровичу. И, надеюсь, не последний раз, потому что профессор преподает в том университете, с которым у нас есть связи. Наверное, ребята-экономисты смогут ими воспользоваться. И еще раз спасибо.